Hello! Today for my cultural artifact, I'm going to share a time capsule of sorts. The time capsule is actually my grandparents' house here because I am living here right now, and I'm going to walk around and show you various items that demonstrate different ideas related to cultural encounters with older populations. So the book explains that the characteristic feature of older people is diversity. So while there's no one single kind of older person, I thought creating this artifact would draw attention to the different lifestyles that people from older generations live, often compared to us. So we've discussed many of these ideas about geriatrics in class already, but I will mention a few that highlight the culture that these people came from rather than the culture they live in now. So I hope this video reminds you to consider and respect the vast experiences that elderly people have under their belts, the knowledge that comes with this, and then also just the contrasting background that elderly people have compared to you. So the first example is written records. So I went around and found some written records. This one says West House records, and we have animal records. And then another example, just a book with a bunch of written records in here. And then my grandma kept a record of all the cards she ever made. And then, of course, just things like recipes. So these are all examples of written records. So when it comes to therapy, we should consider that older people might like having things written down. So whether it's their home exercise program, whether it's paying with check instead of some other method, that might be their preference. And then I was talking to my CI about this, and we actually have a bunch of patients right now who bring in their folder of all of their recent medical information. So they just like to have a record of all of that. So being able to provide them paper copies of things like their schedule and their home exercise program would be helpful. My next example is someone's residence. So my grandparents have lived in this house or the house across the street basically their whole lives, so they don't really know anything different. And so that could be the case with a lot of older people. They kind of settle their roots somewhere, and that's where they live. So when that changes, this can be very disruptive and upsetting to their sense of self. So this is something to consider, especially if someone just moved into a nursing home or assisted living, thinking about how much that has changed their life could be important. My next example is a clothesline. So I was actually talking to my CI about this one, and she said that she's noticed that older people are much more apt to hang their clothes on a clothesline, which is important for PT because rather than just bringing your clothes from washer to dryer, they might be picking up a big, heavy laundry basket, bringing it all the way outside, and then also need to have the shoulder range of motion to hang their clothes up on the clothesline. My next example is communication styles. So a couple items that I want to show for this one is an old phone, written cards and letters, and things like newspaper and magazine clippings. So what this means for physical therapy is I think we should use phone calls a lot more for this generation, as they like that verbal communication more, and they might not read things online, or they might not get texts, let's say, about a appointment reminder. Additionally, this generation, since they did grow up on so much written communication, such as reading a big chunk of a newspaper or reading a whole user manual or something, because of all this, I feel like they have longer attention spans, especially compared to us younger people who have so many visual distractions. So when it comes to making a home exercise program, rather than maybe having them watch a video, having a list of instructions for them to read through might be more helpful, as long as they don't have any other impairments such as visual or cognitive impairments. My last item for this time capsule is my grandma's sewing room. So this is just an example of one of many hobbies that older people might have. And this is something to consider when working with this older population. Likely they're retired and have had a lot more time to develop something like sewing, or for my grandpa, woodworking. So these are just things to think about as you talk to them and maybe start getting to know them more, and it could help you build a relationship with that person. So that about wraps things up. I talked to my CI about my project, and she thought it was a great idea, as basically all of us will work with the geriatric population at some point in our lives, and they definitely grew up in a different culture than we did. So Yeah, one thing she wanted to add was that she's noticed that a lot of older people, when they grew up, they were a lot less likely to see the doctor for things, and that was just the culture they lived in. So, for example, I talked to my grandpa earlier today, and he said one time he dislocated his shoulder, and it was kind of just hanging there for a couple hours, and maybe someone these days would go to the doctor for that, but he kind of just waited it out and never had physical therapy or anything for that. So, you might see people with unresolved injuries. But yeah, that is my cultural artifact. I just thought these would be a good couple things to consider when interacting with older populations. While they might not all directly impact physical therapy, I think thinking about the background someone grew up in can create good conversation with them, promote better communication, and then ultimately just like develop a better relationship with your patient.